Real Madrid star at a crossroads, Arsenal building behind the scenes, and a World Cup quarter-final that will split Emirates loyalties. Right now, inside the corridors of the Santiago Bernabeu, there is a decision hanging in the air that could reshape the entire landscape of European football this summer. Florentino Perez has just delivered a direct message to one of his biggest stars, and the response to that message is going to determine whether one of the most explosive attackers in world football stays in Spain or walks straight into a Premier League bidding war. At the same time, 4 different Arsenal players are preparing to walk out onto a pitch in Miami this Saturday, knowing that the man standing across from them in a different shirt is their own club captain in spirit, their own teammate, their own friend. This is where we are right now. Contracts on the brink, World Cup rivalries about to boil over, and a transfer market that is already moving even while the world's biggest tournament is still being played. Every summer in football has a defining tension, and this one is shaping up to be about timing. Timing for Real Madrid, who cannot afford to let a contract situation drift into next year. Timing for Arsenal, who are trying to build a squad capable of competing on every front while also being patient enough not to overpay for the wrong targets. And timing for a group of Arsenal players who, for 90 minutes this weekend, have to put club friendship aside and compete directly against each other for a place in a World Cup semi-final. Nothing about this moment is background noise. Everything happening right now is going to have consequences that stretch well beyond this week. Here is what is actually at risk in Madrid right now. Vinicius Jr has been told in no uncertain terms that he must sign a new contract this summer or accept that he will be placed on the transfer market. That is not a soft suggestion. That is a club telling one of its most important players that time is running out. If nothing changes, he enters the final year of his deal in 2026, and Real Madrid know exactly what that means. They risk losing him for free in 2027. For a club with the financial power of Real Madrid, letting a player of that level simply walk away for nothing is not an option they are prepared to accept quietly. That is the pressure sitting on this negotiation right now. And it is worth pausing here to really understand the scale of what is being risked. This is a player who, at his best, is one of the most feared attackers anywhere in the world. Losing a player like that for nothing is not just a financial mistake, it is a footballing one, a competitive one, a reputational one. Real Madrid do not make decisions like this lightly, which is exactly why the message from Perez has been so direct. There is no ambiguity left in what the club wants. Sign or be sold. That is the position, and it is a position that puts enormous pressure on both sides to move quickly. Before I go further into how this is playing out, and before we get into the 4 Arsenal players heading into a World Cup quarter-final against their own teammate, if you want the kind of deep, no-filler analysis that actually explains what these moves mean rather than just repeating headlines, this is exactly the channel for that. Hit that subscribe button if you want the full picture, because what happens over the next few weeks at Arsenal is going to move fast, and I want you to be ahead of it, not catching up on it. Now let us go through everything, piece by piece, starting with what has actually surfaced in the last 24 hours. The first piece of information puts everything in the clearest possible terms. Real Madrid are prepared to sell Vinicius Jr if he does not sign a new contract, and Arsenal are among the clubs being kept informed of how this situation develops. Here is how I see this. This is not confirmation of a bid. It is not confirmation of contact between Arsenal and the players' camp directly at club level. What it confirms is that Arsenal are one of the parties being kept in the loop, which tells you they are positioned and ready if the situation escalates. That is a very different thing from an active pursuit, and I want every viewer walking away from this understanding that distinction clearly. Being kept informed is a form of due diligence. It means Arsenal's recruitment staff are watching closely, gathering information, and preparing contingency plans without necessarily committing resources yet. That is smart, disciplined business, not reckless speculation. Then we have a fan reaction circulating that argues Arsenal should abandon interest in Alvarez and pursue Vinicius instead, painting a picture of an attack featuring Vinicius alongside Saka, Rodgers, Geertruida, Havertz, and Easy. It also references an earlier report suggesting Real Madrid privately believe there is a real possibility Vinicius leaves this summer. Let me break this down for you. This is a fan opinion, not a confirmed transfer plan from the club, and it reflects the mood among supporters more than anything concrete. But the underlying belief from within Madrid that a departure is genuinely possible is significant, because it shows the anxiety is not just external noise, it is something being discussed inside the club itself. When a supporter base starts constructing entire forward lines around a player who is not even confirmed as available, That tells you how much appetite exists for a marquee move. It also tells you that fans understand exactly what this kind of signing would mean for Arsenal's ceiling as a squad. This is not a want, it is closer to a fantasy, but fantasies like this only spread when the underlying rumour has real substance behind it. Next, we have a statement directly from Vinicius Jr himself, released after Brazil's exit from the World Cup in the round of 16. He described the difficulty of reflecting on a tournament that ended in frustration, spoke about how much he prepared and how much it meant to him personally, and made clear that despite the disappointment, he intends to keep fighting for Brazil's return to the top of international football. Now here is what this really means. This shows a player processing a painful international exit at the exact same moment his club future is under real pressure. That is a heavy combination for any 25-year-old to be carrying into a contract negotiation. It is easy to look at a player like Vinicius and only see the transfer fee, the wage demands, the market speculation. But what this statement reminds us is that there is a human being at the centre of all of this. Someone who just experienced one of the most painful moments of his international career, and who now has to walk straight into one of the most consequential negotiations of his club career, with almost no time to breathe in between. That context matters when trying to understand why talks might be moving more slowly than either side would like. Moving to a completely separate thread, there is confirmed reporting that Arsenal are maintaining regular contact with the camp of Christos Tzolis, the Club Brugge forward. Tzolis wants a move to Arsenal, but that move is dependent on Trossard first deciding whether he is leaving the club, with Besiktas reportedly pushing to sign Trossard. Here is the part most people are missing. This is not an isolated pursuit. It is a domino situation. Arsenal's move for Tzolis is effectively paused until Trossard's future is resolved one way or the other. This is a pattern we see constantly in modern football recruitment. Clubs rarely make wide forward signings in isolation because squad space and wage budgets are finite. If Trossard stays, the picture around Tzolis becomes far more complicated because Arsenal would then be adding to an already crowded forward line rather than replacing outgoing depth. If Trossard leaves for Besiktas, the pathway becomes far clearer, and Tzolis' specific characteristics as a direct, aggressive wide forward would slot into that vacancy quite naturally. Either way, this tells you Arsenal's recruitment department is thinking in terms of net squad balance, not just isolated transfer targets. There is also confirmation that 18-year-old centre-back Elijah Upson has chosen to join Arsenal, turning down a professional contract at Tottenham, along with interest from Chelsea, Manchester City, and Bayern Munich. Upson is the son of former Arsenal and England defender Matthew Upson. Let me give you my honest take on this. This is a smaller story in terms of headlines, but it is not small in terms of what it says about Arsenal's academy pool right now. When a young defender turns down Tottenham, Chelsea, Manchester City, and Bayern Munich to join Arsenal, that tells you the club's reputation for developing young players is translating into real recruitment power at academy level. This is the kind of story that rarely makes front pages, but it is exactly the sort of signing that shapes a club's future 5 or 6 years down the line. Arsenal's academy pathway has become genuinely attractive to families who have serious options elsewhere, and that reputation does not build itself overnight. It is the product of a consistent pathway to first-team opportunities that other clubs simply cannot match right now. On the Bruno Guimaraes situation, there are 2 connected pieces of information. Arsenal are expected to formally open talks with Newcastle, prepared to go up to £65 million. Newcastle's valuation, if they move away from their not-for-sale stance, sits closer to between £80 million and £90 million. Separately, Arsenal are internally discussing another offer for Guimaraes, with agent Geertruida continuing to act as the line of communication between the 2 clubs. Here is what you really need to understand. When you put these 2 pieces together, what you get is a negotiation still very much alive, but with a significant gap between what Arsenal are willing to pay and what Newcastle currently want. 65 million against 80 to 90 million is not a small difference to close. This is the kind of gap that either requires patience, structured payment terms, add-ons tied to performance, or a change in stance from one of the 2 clubs. What is clear is that Arsenal have not walked away and Newcastle have not shut the door completely either, otherwise there would be no ongoing internal discussion about a new offer. The presence of an established intermediary in these talks also tells you this is a serious, structured pursuit rather than a speculative approach. Turning to the World Cup, there is a short but powerful reaction from Mikel Merino after his stoppage time winner against Belgium. He spoke about the pride of being able to bring joy to so many people, not just in Spain but across the world. Let me put this in plain terms for you. That is a simple statement, but it tells you everything about the weight he understands his moments carry on the biggest stage in football. Merino is not a player who has spent his career chasing individual headlines. He has built his reputation on reliability and timing rather than spectacle. So when a player like that speaks about bringing joy to the world, it is worth noticing, because it reflects a genuine understanding of what these moments mean beyond the result itself. Following that, pundit Stephen Warnock offered a detailed breakdown of why Merino's goal was not luck, pointing to the timing of his run, his composure, and his understanding of where the ball would fall, noting that Mikel Arteta trusts him in a centre-forward role specifically because of the quality of his movement. Warnock also raised the point that if Spain go on to win this World Cup, Merino's contribution, despite fewer minutes than the headline stars, may prove to be the biggest of all. Here is my take on what is really going on. That is a genuinely interesting angle for Arsenal supporters to sit with, because it reframes Merino not as a squad option, but as a player capable of deciding the outcome of a World Cup from the bench. This is exactly the profile Arteta has been building at Arsenal for the past 2 seasons, a squad deep enough that impact substitutes can change games at the very highest level. Seeing that quality translate directly onto the international stage validates the way Arsenal have used Merino domestically. Bukayo Saka's reaction to that same goal adds another layer. Saka spoke about how proud he was of Merino, specifically referencing the work Merino put in behind the scenes to even make it to this World Cup given the injury he was carrying. Let me walk you through this step by step. Coming from a teammate who sees that work every single day at Arsenal, that reaction carries real weight. It is not a generic compliment, it is a teammate acknowledging a specific and difficult recovery. This is the kind of detail that never shows up in a highlight reel. Recovery work, rehabilitation, the hours spent in a treatment room rather than on a training pitch, none of that is visible to the public. But Saka has seen it directly, day after day, which is why his praise lands differently than a generic congratulatory message would. Then we have the statistic that puts Merino's tournament into full historical context. He is now the first player in FIFA World Cup history to score the winning goal in 2 different knockout stage matches as a substitute. Here is how I see this. That is not just a good run of form. That is a genuinely unprecedented achievement in the context of World Cup history, and it is happening to a player who wears an Arsenal shirt every week. Statistics like this do not come around often, and when they do, they tend to define a tournament narrative around a single player. For Arsenal supporters, there is a real sense of pride in watching a player they see every week produce a record that has never existed before in the history of the competition. Shifting back to squad business, there is confirmation that Arsenal are willing to listen to offers for Christian Norgaard this summer, with Crystal Palace viewed as an attractive option partly because it would allow him to remain in London, alongside sporadic interest from other Premier League clubs. Here is the part most people are missing. This tells you Arsenal are already thinking about squad turnover even while chasing incomings like Guimaraes and Tzolis. Norgaard has been a reliable presence, but reliability alone does not guarantee a starting role forever, and this listening stance suggests the club is preparing for natural squad evolution. If Guimaraes does arrive, the midfield picture changes considerably, and a player like Norgaard, now 32, may reasonably prefer regular football elsewhere, rather than fighting for limited minutes in a deeper squad. Crystal Palace being framed as attractive specifically because it keeps him in London is a small but telling detail, because it suggests this is being discussed with the player's own preferences in mind, not just as a straightforward financial transaction. On the defensive side, there is a statistic on William Saliba that deserves real attention. He has conceded just 1 non-penalty goal for club and country in his last 13 matches, stretching back to the 25th of April. In that same period, he won the Premier League, played in a Champions League final, and reached a World Cup semi-final. Let me give you my honest take on this. When you strip away the noise and just look at that raw number, 1 non-penalty goal conceded in 13 matches across the most demanding stretch of a football calendar, it tells you Saliba is currently operating at an elite defensive level, arguably as good as anyone in the world in his position. This is not a stat built during a quiet run of easy fixtures. This is a stat built across a title-winning run in a Champions League final, and a World Cup campaign that has reached the Final Four. Consistency at that level, across that range of competitions and opposition quality, is exceptionally rare, and it should be talked about far more than it currently is. There is also team news confirming Declan Rice has returned to England training after missing a session through illness, and he is now expected to start against Norway in Saturday's World Cup quarter-final. Here is what you really need to understand. This is a genuine boost for England given how central Rice has become to Thomas Tuchel's setup. Losing a session to illness this close to a quarter-final could easily have been a concern, but the fact he has trained normally and is expected to start removes any lingering doubt heading into one of the biggest matches of the tournament so far. And that quarter-final brings us to one of the most fascinating storylines of this entire World Cup from an Arsenal perspective. Martin Odegaard, ahead of facing England, spoke about the challenge of coming up against four of his own Arsenal teammates. He described them as outstanding, world-class players representing one of the best national teams on earth, and he specifically praised Declan Rice as a very complete player, calling the upcoming match a good test for everyone involved. Let me break this down for you. Odegaard, Arsenal's own captain, is about to spend 90 minutes trying to beat his own club colleagues on the biggest stage in football. There is no rivalry there in the traditional sense, but there is a fascinating tension between club loyalty and national pride that very few players ever have to navigate at this level. For 90 minutes, teammates who trust each other completely on a weekly basis will be actively working against one another, each trying to end the other's World Cup campaign. That is one of the more unusual pressures top-level football produces, and it is a genuinely unique subplot for Arsenal supporters to watch unfold. Finally, on the domestic front, it has been confirmed that the majority of Arsenal's players will return to training for pre-season on Monday, the 20th of July. Here is how I see this. Whatever happens with Vinicius, with Bruno Guimaraes, with Tzolis, with Norgaard, the football calendar is already turning back toward Arsenal's own preparations for the new season. There is something grounding about this piece of news sitting alongside all of the transfer speculation. Regardless of how any of these situations resolve, pre-season is coming, and Arsenal's own building process continues on schedule. Now let us step back and look at the two bigger stories properly, because both of them tell us something important about the direction Arsenal are heading in this summer. Start with Vinicius Jr. The situation is genuinely delicate. Real Madrid's hierarchy has reiterated to his camp that they are not prepared to let him enter the final year of his contract with the risk of losing him for nothing in 2027. Madrid have already offered to increase his basic salary from around £350,000 per week to a package worth more than £400,000 per week, a figure that would leave only Kylian Mbappe earning more at the club. Let me put this in plain terms for you. That is not a small increase. That is Real Madrid trying to make him one of the two highest earners at the entire club. And yet, despite that, negotiations remain at a standstill, because his representatives are reportedly seeking something closer to £500,000 per week, a figure Madrid are currently unwilling to meet. The gap between £400,000 and £500,000 per week may not sound enormous in isolation, but multiplied across the length of a new contract, it represents a substantial financial commitment, and it explains exactly why talks have stalled rather than collapsed. Both sides are still within touching distance of each other, which is often the hardest kind of negotiation to resolve, because neither party feels they need to move first. What makes this even more complex is the alternative sitting on the table. The Saudi Pro League continues to view Vinicius as a potential marquee signing, with an open-ended proposal available that would comfortably eclipse his current salary, potentially doubling his existing wages. Here is my take on what is really going on. That is an enormous financial pull for any player to have to consider, regardless of ambition or love for the club they currently play for. It changes the entire dynamic of the negotiation, because Real Madrid are no longer just negotiating against their own wage structure limitations. They are negotiating against an alternative that could double what they are currently offering. That is a very difficult number for any traditional European club to compete with directly. If he decides his future stays in Europe, the realistic list becomes much shorter. Bayern Munich remain firm admirers and continue to monitor the situation, viewed as one of the few clubs financially capable of funding a move of that scale. And then there is England. His representatives have held discussions through intermediaries with several Premier League clubs, after previously indicating he would be open to playing in England. Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester United, Manchester City and Liverpool have all been kept informed of the situation. None of these clubs have submitted a formal offer, but each has indicated they would seriously explore a deal if Vinicius genuinely becomes available. Here is what you really need to understand. For Arsenal specifically, this lines up with a stated priority of adding a new starting left winger this summer. If Vinicius does become available, bringing him to the Emirates would represent one of the biggest statements the club could possibly make in the transfer market. But any Premier League club interested would have to offer him a hugely lucrative contract to have any real chance of winning that race, given the financial competition from Saudi Arabia and Real Madrid's own improved offer. This is worth repeating clearly for anyone getting excited about this rumour, because excitement and reality are two very different things here. Being informed is not the same as being in a race. Being open to exploring a deal is not the same as preparing a formal bid. Arsenal are positioned, but positioned is not the same as pursuing. For now, the priority from Madrid's side remains reaching an agreement, but the message from within the club is unmistakably clear. If no agreement is reached, Real Madrid are prepared to consider selling one of their biggest stars rather than risk him edging toward free agency. Now to the second major story, the battle developing over luchador Geertruida. Geertruida joined Sunderland last summer on a season-long loan that included an option to buy worth around £20 million, and he made 30 appearances as Sunderland remarkably qualified for the Europa League by finishing 7th in their first season back in the Premier League. That loan spell was almost cut short back in January, when Liverpool opened talks for him after injuries to both Conor Bradley and Jeremy Frimpong left them short at right back. Liverpool actually reached a full agreement with Geertruida on personal terms at that time, a move driven by their manager at the time, who had previously worked with him at Feyenoord. But ultimately, the complexity of negotiating with both Sunderland and Leipzig simultaneously meant the deal collapsed before the January deadline closed. Let me walk you through this step by step. Liverpool remain interested in Geertruida even now, but their plans could be disrupted by Arsenal, who are reportedly targeting a move for the same player, setting up a direct transfer battle between the two clubs. Arsenal have placed him on their shortlist for the right-back position, with the club's board attracted specifically by his versatility and experience. He is available for around €25 million this summer, which works out to about £21 million, slightly higher than the option Sunderland originally negotiated. Here is how I see this. For a player with Premier League, German Bundesliga, and Eredivisie experience, who can operate in multiple defensive positions, that fee looks like real value if Arsenal are able to win the race. A player who has already proven himself across 3 major leagues and who can play both right-back and centre-back is exactly the kind of versatile profile modern squads are built around. £21 million for that profile at 25 years old represents a low-risk, high-reward kind of signing. This links directly into Arsenal's broader plans at right-back. The club has already approved the sale of Ben White, whom they signed for £50 million back in 2021, understanding his own desire for more regular starts elsewhere. That means Arsenal need to strengthen that position, and their shortlist currently includes Geertruida alongside Ezri Konsa of Aston Villa and Aaron Wan-Bissaka of West Ham United. Here is the part most people are missing. Should Geertruida end up moving to the Emirates, he would provide direct competition and cover for Jurrien Timber in that starting role, which is exactly the kind of depth Arsenal have been lacking at that position. Having genuine competition at right-back, rather than relying on makeshift solutions, has been a clear gap in the squad, and resolving that gap through a versatile, experienced defender at a sensible fee would represent smart business regardless of how the Liverpool race plays out. When you step back and look at everything together, here is my honest take on what you see. This is a club moving on multiple fronts at once. There is genuine central midfield ambition with the sustained pursuit of Bruno Guimaraes, even with a real financial gap still separating the two clubs. There is depth being addressed out wide with the interest in Tzolis, contingent on Trossard's own future being resolved first. There is defensive rebuilding underway with the search for a right-back to replace Ben White, with Geertruida now emerging as a genuine contest against Liverpool. There is academy strength being reinforced by the arrival of a highly rated young defender who turned down 4 major clubs to join instead. And hanging above all of it is the enormous, still unresolved question of whether one of the most electric attacking talents in world football ends up walking straight into this rebuilt Arsenal squad. Meanwhile, on the international stage, this club's own players are proving their value on the very biggest occasions. Merino writing himself into World Cup history. Saliba delivering a defensive record that speaks for itself. Rice returning fit and ready for a genuine quarter-final test. And 4 Arsenal teammates preparing to face each other across the pitch in Miami, with their own captain openly acknowledging just how good his friends and colleagues have become. This is where Arsenal stand right now, contracts unresolved, transfer battles heating up, and a World Cup quarter-final that will have Arsenal supporters split down the middle, cheering for their club's players no matter which shirt they are wearing on the day. If you want to stay ahead of every single one of these stories as they develop, subscribe now, because this summer at Arsenal is only just beginning to move.